Good afternoon. It's Wednesday the 24th of October 2012. Welcome to UK Column Live from the Plymouth Studios. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish. And I can tell you it's a little bit cool in the Plymouth studio, which is why we're wearing sweaters today, unlike the BBC where we understand that it's getting quite hot. So thank you for joining us. As usual, we're going to take a rather different look at the news. We're going to try and bring in some focus on the serious events that are not only happening around the world, but in UK. We're going to kick off with a home story this morning, which is that The Guardian is pointing out that Lord Patten is now being forced to defend the BBC as the Jimmy Savile scandal grows. And he's been speaking out after criticism of the performance of director George Entwistle in front of MPs yesterday. And the very interesting thing about Lord Patten is he is another one of the Tories that speaks out for openness and transparency. Of course, great friends with David Cameron and Francis Maude. But it's not only just the scandal about Jimmy Savile that's affecting the BBC, because in the background the BBC has also been accused of lacking transparency. And the topic I'd just like to highlight is this is a Freedom of Information request that was sent into the BBC, or rather it's their reply to a Freedom of Information request that was sent in. It's dated 24th of August 2010, and questions have been asked about the number of people in the BBC who'd been trained as common purpose future leaders. Of course, this is a programme fully supported not only by Mr Patten but also Prime Minister David Cameron. And in this first reply, the BBC admits to having spent the vast sum of £126,393 between 2005 and 2010 on common purpose training. But the second part of the question was really to do with names and details of those in the BBC who had been trained. And the second part of the letter here, the first paragraph, which is a little bit small, so we'll just blow that up, is giving some very interesting information. It says, in relation to your request for information as to how many BBC employees have attended common purpose activities in the last 5 years, the financial transactions between the BBC and common purpose are held on a separate system to the central training system, and this does not always provide details of who benefited from the transaction. As these transactions were not for centrally organised training events, attendance has not been recorded on our central training database, except in a very few cases. There is a central record of 7 staff having attended the training between 2005 and 2010. So the simple point that UK Column Live would like to make is that not only is the BBC less than transparent over the actions of paedophiles within the organisation, that they've been less than transparent over revealing who has been trained with public money under common purpose programmes. We're not sure how many, we're not sure of the names, and the BBC doesn't want to release the names. So as an organisation, we can see that the climate is set for cover-ups wherever needed, I think.
Indeed.
Moving on to bigger things, you've got a picture here of
affairs.
An interesting railway.
Right, so RT reporting a couple of days ago now actually that Russia, well the headline suggests that Russia is pondering a new railroad-based missile system. But actually, when you read on down the article, they are pointing out that plans are underway to create a combat railway-based missile system. And the idea is to have intercontinental ballistic missiles sitting on the backs of trains which look like either refrigerator or passenger trains. I mean, we know that, you pointed out earlier that Russia has had this type of delivery system in the past, but they were it was old technology and they were scrapped. And the point is here that Russia is beginning to reinvest in its nuclear capability.
Yeah.
And to move on to the next story, what we're highlighting is that actually there's quite a lot going on around the world with regard to things nuclear in terms of weaponry. So this is actually an article from earlier in the month where North Korea was effectively saying to the United Nations that United States policy towards North Korea had made the Korean Peninsula the most dangerous place on the planet, that any spark there could ignite a nuclear war between themselves and South Korea. And they're saying, the quote from the foreign minister is, today, due to the continued US hostile policy towards North Korea, the vicious cycle of confrontation and aggravation of tensions is an ongoing phenomenon in the Korean Peninsula, which has become the world's most dangerous hotspot where a spark of fire could set off a nuclear war. Again, back to RT, we're seeing Iran threatening to attack US bases if, excuse me, if war erupts with Israel. And basically what Iran is saying is that the United States is so associated with Israeli saber-rattling and potential attack on Iran that Iran would attack the United States if Israel were to attack, US bases if Israel were to attack Iran. Again, from RT, we've got Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, coming out and making a point about Syria being a pawn in the great geopolitical game. And again, he's highlighting the fact that the United States and Britain and other Western nations are playing a dangerous game in the Middle East. They're trying to reposition their pawns in the Middle East in order to create a different strategic geopolitical picture. In parallel with that, we've got a number of military operations, joint exercises going on. So earlier in the year, we reported on Operation Austere Challenge 2012, and we pointed out that had been postponed until later in the year. This is now later in the year, and that operation is going on at the moment. This is the biggest US-Israeli military exercise in quite some time. And it's a 3-week exercise. It will test various defense systems, missile defense systems. And in parallel with that then, in Europe, we have Operation Steadfast Noon, which according to NATO is a cross-services exercise to train crews in loading, unloading and employing B-61 tactical nuclear weapons. And so we're seeing this amazing sort of strategic picture around the geopolitical picture around the world of tension being pushed forward by the United States and Britain. Russia is reacting because Russia clearly sees itself as a target here, and you know, at the same time we have. Well, I'm just going to show a little video clip here because this is a conversation. People may have seen it, a conversation between Obama and Romney at the recent final debate between the two. Yeah. And this is Obama's comments about Romney's sort of foreign policy. Yeah.
We just say to viewers, we're going to run through this material and then we'll have a bit of a discussion about what we think is going on.
If I can get this.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat. Because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because, you know, the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
Okay, so Obama there is criticizing Romney for suggesting that Russia is a potential risk to the security of the United States. Now, I would actually say that
we could argue the opposite.
Quite the opposite. That the United States is a problem for Russia and most of the world at the moment, actually. But you know, Romney has pointed out that Russia should be on the horizon. On the other hand, Obama considers that the biggest geopolitical threat to the world is these guys. So we're seeing. Nuclear. Everywhere we go, it's nuclear being either tested or I mean, we commented on Russia testing its nuclear arsenal directly last week. But everywhere around the world we're seeing nuclear this, nuclear that, and Obama's still saying Al-Qaeda. So, what's your assessment of what's going on there?
Well, I think if we just start off with the Russian ICBMs on railways, if I look at this is Russia worried about a first strike. So Russia is saying we need the capability to make sure that we can move Russian ICBMs around the country, and this is one way of doing them. I suspect it's also tied in with the vulnerability of ballistic nuclear submarines as detection systems improve. I think that there's been a reliance back on land-based systems, but if you're going to do that, you simply can't afford to have your missiles in a static position. So what the Russians are, I think, showing is that they're reacting to the fact that can they absorb a nuclear strike and still have weapons to fire. So the minimum you can say is clearly the Russians are extremely concerned about what they regard as an increase in principally American nuclear capability. And they're being encircled, really. If we look at the map, Russia is being encircled.
Absolutely, and they're commenting on the geopolitical game that's being played in the Middle East. But we've also got we've got Iran and North Korea also feeling extremely threatened at the moment. So it's a dangerous game that's being played, I think.
Yeah, it's almost, I think it's like the game of Risk, where you've got armies manoeuvring around the world. But if we just stand back from the board a bit, what you can clearly see is that there is a ramping up of power. This is largely coming from the strength of the Americans, but we've got residue of NATO, we've got the European Union in there, and essentially it's a power base from the West which is steadily expanding. And of course North Korea and Iran at the moment form two states that so far have refused to knuckle down and kowtow to the diktats from both the US and the British. So I think at the moment what we've got is nuclear saber rattling with the idea of trying to force other nation states into submission. And of course the Russians are not going to do that. They're going to, certainly Putin has shown that he's not going to allow himself to become a second-class citizen. So I think the key here is that we can see that the Russians are responding. But also we've got a propaganda exercise, haven't we? Because we are reporting these major nuclear exercises which are simply not being reported on British mainstream television. I don't know what the picture's like in America, but if we stick with life in Britain, we are not seeing anything about this. What we are seeing is the last picture that we've just shown you, that we apparently should be desperately worried about Mujahideen or the fictitious Al-Qaeda going to do everything from attacks in Afghanistan to attacks in mainland Europe and Britain. So to me, I think we are being led a merry dance by a propaganda exercise, which is to make us fearful on one level, which is all to do with Al-Qaeda is going to attack, Al-Qaeda will do this, Al-Qaeda will do that. In the background, the nuclear posturing is to try and force these other states into submission, and I think that the links in with Israel at the moment, it's becoming increasingly clear that it seems that Britain, America, and Israel are joined at the hip when it comes to worldwide military policy. It's very hard to explain for me in one way, because in my 20 years inside the military, contact with Israeli forces appeared to be minimal. And now all of a sudden we're seeing that on a world scale everything is to do with what is happening in Israel and what isn't happening in Israel, and whether Israel feels threatened. And of course we've got David Cameron as a Prime Minister saying his biggest allegiance is to Israel. Yeah. So I think it's very important for the alternative media to get digging in this, but certainly on the subject of Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda, I think that the propaganda goes on that this, that this war is needed when it isn't, and it's to give us the impression that we're constantly at risk of threats. Dark subject, so it's probably appropriate for this man to pop up.
Right, so here's Mervyn King, our bastion of financial sensibilities. He was in Wales last night, not quite clear exactly where he was in Wales last night because, of course, that's not being, we're not being told. But he was speaking in Wales last night. And he is saying that no recovery is possible until the banks recapitalise. And what he's effectively acknowledging here is that British banks are bankrupt, that they can't function, they're not functioning, they need to recapitalise, and he's saying that in fact they need to recapitalise because they've got a whole load of bad debts on the way, and if they don't recapitalise, we're going to be facing a further massive financial crisis. And indeed the Daily Mail highlighted that with what's quite a emotive headline, I think. Children will live in the shadow of economic crisis for a long time, says the Bank of England, Sir Mervyn King. I mean, what's your take on that headline? It's an amazing headline.
Well, I just find it remarkable. We've got somebody casually saying that, well, things are so bad that our children are going to live in a very, I think he's talking about a new dark age. But certainly we've reported enough on UK Column Live. We've reported about the lack of jobs for young people, the debt that young people are in, the fact they can't house themselves properly, and in many cases they can't feed themselves. And here we have this obscenely wealthy banker casually saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We're going to leave our children to live in the dark ages, when of course we can do something about it.
Indeed. So his solution that he was pushing last night was that banks need to take advantage of the funding for lending scheme. And just to remind everybody what that is, it's £80 billion of taxpayer money, which will be loaned to the banks at 0.25%, which is obviously half of what the bank base rate is at the moment. So taxpayer money gets lent to the banks at 0.25%. You've got to ask where that taxpayer money comes from. That
was the question I was going to ask. Where did the £80 billion come from?
So the 80 billion, of course, is going to come from bonds, which are being sold to investors at interest. So say the bond, I don't know what UK bonds are at the moment, 3% or whatever.
Right, but if we do this in simple terms, we've got a piece of paper called a bond.
Yeah, which is sold to a private investor who gives the government then other pieces of paper which say pounds on them.
Right.
And those pounds are then given to the banks at 0.25%.
In order for them to give...
In order for the banks to lend those for mortgages and small business loans. Right, so the point is that the banks get the money at 0.25%. They lend the money for mortgages and small business loans at, well, what's a mortgage rate? 5, 6, 7% at the moment. Small business loan could be anything. It depends on the business, but it's certainly greater than 5%. So the question is, why can't the government lend the money to the businesses at 0.25% directly and get the economy going, if that's what they feel needs to be done?
Yeah.
Why do they need this to put the banks in the middle? Because this is actually a bank bailout. So the banks are getting the money at 0.25%. They're selling it on at 5 or 6%. This is actually a bank bailout.
It's a scam.
It's a scam.
At the end
absolutely.
of the day,
yes.
we should describe it for what it is. It's a scam, and obviously it's a scam that Sir Mervyn King and the Bank of England are right in the middle of.
So what King is saying is that banks must use this window of opportunity. That's the word he used. Window of opportunity to restore the capital position of the UK banking system, because the banks are bankrupt.
So it is what we're seeing here is this: the banks now actually realising they're in trouble. They're scrabbling for a life raft. We can provide a monetary life raft for the banks, but we can't provide a monetary life raft for the people creating the wealth, the people in the business in the first place.
Well, my view of this is that just like with the stuff we were talking about with nuclear weapons and the geopolitical picture, there's a dangerous game also being played in the financial sector here, because of course they're wanting to use the financial crash, this bogus financial crash, as a tool to push through various forms of reform, including political reform. And I suspect that what Mervyn King is doing here is telling them, giving the banks an instruction to start using this window of opportunity to keep themselves going, because they're not ready to proceed with various other agenda items.
Right, but of course we don't even know who he was talking to, because we don't know where he was exactly.
No, the Telegraph, for example, doesn't mention where he was at all. The other papers say that he was in Wales, but they don't say what the event was that he was at. So we don't actually know who he was speaking to. That's
could have been the local Druids meeting or something. We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on with more happy news, we've got the Eurozone PMI data, which is the Purchasing Managers Index. It basically shows what the Eurozone economy is doing. And we're finding that, surprise, surprise, it's not doing anything very much. And I mean, the key point here is, well, other things that we haven't got a picture view, for example, is that Moody's downgraded many of Spain's autonomous regions yesterday, some more downgrades in Europe. We've got the Troika demanding even more austerity measures, faster austerity measures from the Spanish government. We know what's going on in Greece. We know what's going on in Portugal. We've got French business confidence collapsing to levels below those that were there in 2009. So we've got the Eurozone in continuing collapse. And of course, nothing that these guys have done since 2008 has done anything. So here we are, 4 or 5 years past the major economic or financial event that we had, and nothing has changed. And the question I'm just going to ask everybody in the mainstream media is, what are you doing to actually highlight this fact? Nothing has changed. We just continue to in this process of collapse.
Yeah.
It's about time the mainstream media started talking about Glass-Steagall, started talking about putting the banks into proper administration and getting this whole mess sorted out.
Well, we're going to comment on this. We know that what we're watching at the moment, this picture of collapse, is created. This is orchestrated. This is not incompetence by governments and bankers. What we're seeing is a deliberate program. And we also know that the mainstream media, of course, are also part of the propaganda machine. So they're either being sucked in and doing the right things, or the right things as far as the politicians are concerned, the wrong things as regards freedom of speech. But they're either being sucked in or they're being controlled by, of course, the banks that fund the mainstream media. So we're going to be looking into the media more deeply. But I think one of the things that we can suggest at the moment is that the BBC, which is under big attack, obviously, over the paedophile affair, but of course this is the perfect type of attack in order to do a major restructuring of the BBC to bring it even further under government control, rather than to actually get the BBC reporting the things you're talking about. So the media is a subject we are going to focus on, and of course we'll say to all our viewers and listeners, please do not forget that in the background we have Leveson at work on his contrived inquiry, and we can be pretty sure that the outcome of that inquiry is for a move towards more state control of the media. So there's a dictatorship brewing. Yeah. Well, I'd like to introduce the subject of non-reporting in Europe. I wondered how I could capture some of the events in Europe that we are simply not seeing on mainstream television. I took a screenshot here of part of the images, simply looking at rioting, whether it's in Italy or Spain or Greece. We've got hundreds of thousands of people coming onto the street. We've got incredibly aggressive policing taking place. You can watch films on YouTube of Spanish police or Greek police laying into young people with batons, firing rounds, tear gas. Very, very brutal and sinister response from the police in Europe. As we've already described, we've got Switzerland deciding to spend more money on armed army reservists because they're concerned about the breakdown of law and order in Europe. And none of this is being reported with any accuracy by the BBC or indeed any of the other mainstream media. But nevertheless, it's happening. And against this background, and we've picked up on this before, something is happening which does not make sense. It defies common sense, and that is that while we see stability in Europe absolutely falling apart, we've got not only the Tory government under Cameron cutting British armed forces, but in this Mirror article, as you can now see on screen, we've got the Shadow Defence Secretary Jim Murphy committing a Labour government to slashing rear admirals, major generals and air vice marshals. Now, whilst it's true to say that the armed forces have suffered for some time at overmanning at the highest levels, it's very interesting that we've got the situation of this massive instability in Europe. We've got people talking about the possibility of war in Europe, and what our three main parties are doing is cutting and attacking the military. So we're cutting equipment, we're cutting mid-seniority manpower. This is where the real experience is. These are the people you need on the battlefield because they're experienced in the job and they know their systems. So the Tories are attacking the heart of the military and certainly the army. And here we've got Labour lining up to actually attack the top levels of the military. Meanwhile, it's as though the elephant in the room, the instability in Europe, is simply ignored. Another Mirror story to keep our spread across what the mainstream media are saying. This is a very serious article in my opinion. Of course, most people are going to look at it as a bit of fun. We've got a female bodybuilder who's winning an award. But of course, what the article is really doing is painting a picture of the military today. So the headline here, War and Two-Piece, Soldier is crowned UK's top bikini babe. A British Army corporal who served in the Iraq War in 2007 competed in the UK bodybuilding championships in Manchester. And now some viewers and listeners may disagree with what we're going to say on this, but if you actually look at it, what is being presented here is an image of the British Army. So what is really going on is a psychological operation. We're demeaning the British Army by showing a picture. Is it a babe in a bikini or is this a soldier? What is it? And of course, what's really going on is a gentle attack on our minds to say it's neither. And I think we can reinforce this by having a look at this. Was an article that appeared down in Plymouth on September the 5th. And what it was saying was that HMS Ocean may have been busy guarding the Paralympics, but one member of her crew swapped the games for an altogether different venue. The Boston Ballet School, Lieutenant Anna Sanoki, secured one of 25 places on the school's prestigious summer program. And if I just expand this a bit so you can see what we're talking about, here's a picture of a naval officer, and of course this is exactly the same type of thing. You're conducting a media attack on the military by demeaning them, not only in front of the British public but in front of the world public. So who's running our armed forces? Are we into bikini babes or is it ballerinas? You know, it's a serious topic, although I know people are going to have a bit of a light-hearted attitude to it. Moving on to something a bit more in the grain, the Mail today has been reporting that the police forces have been rebuked after wrongly ignoring thousands of complaints that brand them rude or lazy. The Independent Police Complaints Commission overturned almost 2/3 of appeals last year where police had ruled the allegations were unfounded. The watchdog warned chief constables that they must make sure staff are properly dealing with complaints from the public. Of course, what the article doesn't pick up on is that the public are also complaining about the IPCC. There are regular complaints from members of the public that the IPCC are simply not independent and are not doing their job. So here we're seeing, once again, turbulence being created in the police force. But looking at the IPCC in a bit more detail, of course, one of the names that comes up is Dame Anna Owers, who is now heading up IPCC. We thought we'd just have a little bit of look at what this lady has been involved with previously. And one of the organisations that she's been linked with is this one, Justice, which claims to be advancing access to justice, human rights and the rule of law. And I recommend that viewers and listeners go and have a look at this site because they give a strategic plan for 2010-2015 in which they not only discuss what has happened, not only in Britain but worldwide, they also give a forecast as to what is going to happen. But if we look at a little more detail, this is targets that they've set, strategic priorities. I'll just read them very quickly. To influence the Labour Party politicians, so they're committed to civil liberties, human rights and accountability. To influence the Liberal Democrat Party, to influence the Conservative Party, to keep the faith with civil liberties. And I'll just highlight here, they're using the famous word nudge, so they're going to be nudging the Conservative Party towards the acceptance of human rights. They're going to be influencing the party associations of lawyers, influencing the judiciary, influencing lawyers in interest in matters relating to the rule of law, informing the European Commission and European Parliament on matters relating to human rights. So it isn't just a case that we have an independent police commission. What we can actually show you is that the people within that so-called independent organisation are anything but independent. And quite clearly what we're watching here is an agenda for this organisation to influence what policy is. It's perhaps something we should look at in a bit more detail. Two small items to finish off. The Mirror has also flagged up, this is an iPhone application which is supposedly helping to teach teens about sex, but it's being criticised for actually, once again, encouraging younger teenagers to actually get involved in sex. It's been funded by Warwick University, amongst others. And finally, we're just going to finish on the Badger scandal. Of course, we understand that the Badgers have been fighting back, and as a result of their protests, the cull has actually been called off at the moment. But there's some very interesting questions to be asked about the Badger cull. Is it just the Badgers they're going to cull, or is the government after culling us? We'll leave you with that thought. As always, if you want to stop what's happening, research, check our information, and do start doing something. Write letters, lobby your MP, talk to a friend, encourage others to watch UK Column Live. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.